I'm Jeanette Buck, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the director of Quiet on Set and a member of this collective we call Crow and Heights.
I'm Rainey Day Crow, and I am the producer and the writer. And I'm actually originally from Dayton area.
My name is Bonnie Ray Brickman, and I'm the editor and for Quiet on Set, and on this film also one of the executive producers, along with Jeanette Buck. As Jeanette mentioned, the three of us have worked together before under the banner of Crow and Heights Productions.
You know, there's obviously been so much in the industry papers as well as mainstream news about the abuse of actors and the indiscretions and the transgressions and I'm not thinking about all the right words, but just the horrific conditions that women in particular and also some men have endured on film sets and in their careers as creative people. And so of course we've been talking about this forever. And then there's been a lot of movement in intimacy coordination. But I think for me, the big part of the conversation started a couple years ago when Chicago came out with the Chicago theater standards, which were the ethical standards in which a group called Not in Our House put together for the Chicago theater community. And it was following an event that happened in a theater in Chicago where specifically in that theater for many years, women had been abused by an actor who was also a member of the creative team in that theater. And specifically the incident I think that kicked it off was an actress was being choked on stage every night.
Yeah.
And I think, if I recall the story correctly, her roommate was the one that kind of broke the story about what was happening to this specific person. That cracked open the industry in Chicago, and actors came forward to tell their stories about what had happened to them on stage, in rehearsal halls, and then across the country. Washington, D.C. has its own kind of Not in Our House organization that is working on Washington standards, and it's happening across the country. So a couple of years ago, maybe 3, maybe 4, that became like a huge story across the country, especially in theater and then into film. And so intimacy directors started being used more often. So for me, that also brought up the fact that in every film I've ever directed, I think in every play I've ever directed, there's been an intimate scene. And what have I done? And have I done it correctly? And were the actors safe? And did the crew feel like they were complicit or that they were supportive? And so it made me question all the work that I've done and did I create a space that actors felt like they were respected and that they didn't feel violated on any level. So for me, the last couple of years, that's been a lot of what I've been thinking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the thing, right? To write about and create this story about an unsafe experience on a set. And I mean, that's part of the reason we made the director a woman is because, you know, we understand, like, when you're on set, you are getting the shot, you are getting the film. And we didn't want to just make it like, let's blame leche men. There's something about like how we can all be complicit in what happens, and wanted to explore that. And so we created a project that then, in order to do the project, we had to really try to use like the highest standards to create the safest space possible so that we weren't exploiting our actors in order to create a story about exploiting actors. So, you know, that was really, and when you're doing it with no budget, it's a lot of work. you know, to make sure that everybody feels safe and that you've got a safe place to do that. And there's, you know, there's things that just kept coming up. You know, because we had an intimacy coordinator. We thought we had like a really good team. And then, you know, one of the things we realized was like handling the footage, like making sure that the right people are handling the footage, and that, you know, that we're protecting that other people aren't seeing it, you know. And I know that for me, one of the driving stories was Last Tango in Paris. It was a big story of Bertolucci and Brando, and the actress in that. And then there were other stories. I just kept reading story after story after story. And, you know, there was a story about a show, and one of the things was that the monitor was outside of a safe space. So they were filming something, and even though it was protected, the monitor and the footage was not being protected. So other people were having access to it. You have to be so careful. Somebody's trusting you with images of themselves and exposing themselves on set like that.
Yes, yeah, so just following on from what Rainey touched on, I know before the shoot, Jeanette and I talked a lot about how many takes you were going to do and how we were going to do the wide shots that had the action and the monitor both in the shot. Are we going to try and do it live? So that would limit the amount of times the actors would have, you know, that the actors would have to do it, or would we do it once and then feed that back through the monitors? You know, all of that was part of making that safe space.
Yeah, how many times we were going to ask the actress. And then actually, as we were filming, also realized what we were asking, the burden that we were putting on our male actor. Like, how many times were we going to make them do that? Like, how many takes were we going to do? And how did we create the environment? I mean, there's one shot that we had to have. And how did we, because we wouldn't have a film if we didn't have that one shot of the actress looking at the camera, letting us know what was happening without any words, right? Like, we could see what was happening to her. And we had to have that shot or we didn't have a film. And so how do we create a space where the actress felt that she could go there, but she didn't have to go there over and over and over again? You know, so how do we create an environment and a situation that was doable and possible? So that was, you know, so all, like Rainey was saying, like, how do we create a space on a low budget, getting an intimacy director, taking the time, because you have to make sure you have the time to create a level of safety and secure. And safe is such a meaningless word now, but a place where people felt that they could be brave and do the work. Yeah. We had a rehearsal that was just the intimacy coordinator, myself, Rainey, and the cinematographer, so that there was a very closed situation. And we went through, in intimacy coordination, the scene gets blocked very specifically, so that this is the rollover, this is the hand to the face, this is the kiss. So there's counts, right? So before that even happens, there's this beautiful exercise that we do, that is done, or I've been trained now, I've done some training in intimacy coordinator as an intimacy coordinator, and so I have a sense of what this is about, but where the actors, one actor shows the other actor where they're allowed to touch them, and then takes their hand and puts it on their body, so that, like, me as an actor would take your hand, put it on my body, so that suddenly you understood what was totally possible. And so there was never a moment, like if I said that you could touch me all the way to here or all the way to here, there was never a moment that I thought that you were going, as an actor receiving that touch, that you would go beyond that. Like if I told you that you could go all the way up to my upper thigh, but you couldn't touch my very specific crotch area, I knew that your hand was never going to go there. So that as the actor receiving that touch, I knew what I was in for. right? And so that I knew that then I could act fully in that moment without the concern that then you were going to uh, go beyond. So that was the first rehearsal, right? And then we moved into adding the crew. And there was a really sticky moment when the crew was added. And I had to clear the set and talk to the actors, and we had to kind of start all over again with that level of this is a film set. This is what this is, right? And everybody got back on board, and we had a conversation, the whole crew, about what was happening. And it's difficult. That scene is difficult. When I saw it in rehearsal, I had a problem watching it. So I knew that there were going to be people on the crew that were going to have a hard time watching it when it was happening, because it was so visceral and so real. And I told the crew, everyone in the crew, you're allowed to leave. If this gets too hard for you, you're allowed to leave. And we'll just either cut if we have to and start again, or the person next to you will take up your task. Because there's just no way that I wanted a room where people were just being like having their own emotions touched on and having things having things happen to them internally. There's a lot of women on the crew, so there was a lot of women back, on the outer edges watching. There were really amazing men on the crew that came to talk to me afterwards and said, that was really hard for me. Something similar in my life has happened. So people were in the room having this experience with these actors. So it was, especially the day that we shot that scene, I felt like there was a lot happening in that room, and a lot of people being really brave, confronting or living with a very challenging emotional moment.
I mean, I actually wasn't in the room a lot of the time because we were trying to limit, and I was one of the few people that was not intrinsic to the work at that moment. So I was, producing, doing other things. We had a lot of women on set, which I thought was really helpful. And then the men that we had on set were really wonderful and supportive and mature. And so it was actually one of the best crews I've ever worked with, I think, just as far as like people really being there and present.
You sit and you watch every frame, and you look for the smallest, almost imperceptible change of emotion, or a flick of an eye, or a turn of a head that that tells the story, that moves the story forward. And the beginning of this film, the first minute or so, we cut maybe a half a dozen different times, distilling it down to what the story actually needed, and how we can tell it as powerfully and efficiently as possible. So that opening scene was originally much longer, and I never like cutting the first scene first. I always like seeing what the shape and feel of the film is, and then going back and recutting that opening scene to more accurately, do its job and set up the film. And so I had a couple of passes at that first opening scene, and then I jumped in and cut some later scenes. And then when Jeanette and I went back to that opening scene, we totally pared it down to really, really the essence of it, and to do that as powerfully and efficiently as possible. So yeah, that opening scene, that's the film, right? Like that we had to get that right. On one level, you think her choice is speak up or make that choice to advance her career. And I don't think that that's the choice that she's making. I actually don't think that's the choice. How I experience it is she's in a position where she has no good choice. All of the choices she has are bad. And she's just trying to pick the least bad option for herself. But to couch it as being ambitious, like she chose a career, I think that's a almost simplistic way to look at it, and not really digging down to what really happens when you're in a position like that. I don't think you're thinking about your ambition. I think you're thinking about how do I get out the other side of this? What's going to do the least damage? This is the only control I have is how I react to it. And I got to make a choice that's going to harm me the least. That's what I think her choice is. And you know, any of those are valid, however she decides to get through to the other side. As the editor, I sit and watch this footage, right? As we piece it together and tell the story, I'm watching. And what I see in the footage is everybody's watching, right? So the script supervisor and the director are watching. We see the entire crew watching. We're watching as the viewer. I'm watching as the editor who I'm putting it together. You know, I think that's what I want people to take away from. We're all involved in this. We all, if we looked, we'd see it.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to figure out how to make stuff under the current parameters. So I just started writing these really short, it started as like little shorts that could be filmed with webcams and Zoom kind of things. And then it kind of turned into like an anthology of these little monologues that became this portrait of time during the pandemic. And then it's sort of become, now there's like 2 acts, right? So there's like, the first act is people adapting to the pandemic, and then the second act is people awakening to the Black Lives Matter protests.
And there's that possibility that our last film, Heather Has 4 Moms, might become episodic.
There has been conversation that Crown Heights would put together a feature, and a script that Rainey has been kind of talking about with me is a rape revenge comedy. So we'll see where that goes.